Alpha King Kalen Thornmere declared that North was a matter of blood, instinct, and command. Then he pointed directly at the castle pigsty. Gemma Varel pressed her brass compass against his black breastplate and decided the border crisis was worse than the council had admitted. The compass needle trembled once, settled with the smugness of a tiny metal judge, and pointed the opposite way. Behind Kalen, 3 pigs looked up from their trough with wet pink noses and the peaceful confidence of creatures who had never mistaken themselves for a northern landmark. Kalen did not lower his arm. That was the problem with powerful alpha men, Gemma thought. They could be wrong with extraordinary posture. Mist rolled along the outer yard of Thornmere Castle, softening the gray walls and turning the morning into a damp silver blur. The stones smelled of rain, moss, horse leather, and the sharp iron scent of armed guards trying not to laugh. Somewhere beyond the pigsty, a rooster screamed as if it too had strong opinions about geography. Gemma kept her face professional. This required effort. She was 28, a beta wolf, and the chief cartographer of Thornmere's border archives. She had earned her position through ink-stained fingers and frozen survey mornings. For 5 years, she had corrected noblemen who believed rivers moved for convenience. One winter, she had redrawn 3 flooded villages while feverish and very angry. She did not laugh at clients unless they paid in advance. Alpha King Kalen Thornmere of the Mistwood border was not an ordinary client. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and built like a man carved to make doorways nervous. His black hair was tied at the nape with a strip of dark leather. His eyes were a cold storm gray, his jaw severe, and his armor polished enough to reflect the pigsty he had just promoted to North. He carried a sword at his hip and the reputation of an alpha who had held the border against raiders, winter wolves, and 2 ambitious cousins with very poor timing. He also, Gemma was beginning to understand, could not read a parchment map without creating an international incident. "Your Majesty," she began, keeping her voice calm. Kalen's gaze remained fixed on the pigsty. "That is south," Gemma told him. "More precisely, that is south-southeast, with a strong smell of breakfast scraps." The nearest pig snorted. Kalen lowered his arm at last. He did it slowly, as if changing direction had been part of his plan all along. "The fog distorts distance," he said. Gemma looked at the compass. Then she looked at the pigsty. Then she looked at the Alpha King, whose alpha presence pressed through the wet morning like a storm, trying to enter a room without knocking. Her beta instincts noticed him. Of course they did. Every wolf body in the yard noticed him. The guards stood straighter. The horses shifted. Even the pigs seemed more polite. Gemma's knees wanted to remember hierarchy. Her brain wanted to remember that the border stakes had been placed 2 miles too far east. The brain won. "Fog does many things, Your Majesty. It does not move pigs into the north." A guard coughed into his glove. Kalen turned his head just enough to freeze the cough in the man's throat. The guard immediately discovered a deep interest in the horizon. Gemma tucked the compass back into her leather case. She had been summoned before dawn by a page who looked terrified, damp, and unwilling to explain why the Alpha King needed the castle cartographer in the outer yard without witnesses from the council. The message had said only that King Thornmere required a private review of defensive measurements. Private, in noble language, usually meant embarrassing. She had expected a miscopied scale, a disputed streambed, perhaps a noble neighbor complaining about a ditch. She had not expected the Alpha King of Mistwood to declare war on his own pigsty. Kalen turned back to her. "Master Varel, you were brought here to verify a defensive line, not to make observations about livestock." Gemma opened her field satchel and removed the first boundary sheet. "The livestock is relevant because your proposed north wall begins behind those pigs." The guards became very still. Kalen's expression did not change, but something in the air tightened. Alpha pressure, not full force, not threat. More like the first heavy note of thunder before rain broke. It touched Gemma's skin and slid down her spine. Her beta blood recognized rank, strength, command. Her shoulders wanted to curve. She straightened instead and spread the parchment against a portable board. She had survived blizzards, ink shortages, councilmen, and Lord Perrick's insistence that roughly adjacent was a legal measurement. She would survive one handsome alpha who believed direction could be bullied into obedience. "Here," she said, tapping the map. This is the intended wall line. Kalen stepped closer. His scent arrived before he did. Cold pine, iron, wet leather, and the wild mineral scent of fog over stone. It was an excellent scent. Annoyingly excellent. Gemma made a note to resent it later. He studied the parchment with grave intensity. For several seconds, he looked like a king considering war. Then his eyes narrowed at the scale bar. Gemma saw it. She saw the tiny pause, the slight tightening near his mouth. The way his focus slid from the compass rose to the boundary markers and back again, as if the map had personally insulted him in a language he knew but disliked. There it was. Not stupidity, not laziness, confusion hidden under armor. Kalen pointed to a dark line. This ridge is the old border. That is the drainage ditch. His fingers shifted. Then this. That is the proposed cart road. The silence in the yard grew damp and vivid. Gemma waited. Kalen withdrew his hand from the map. He decided the parchment was poorly organized. Gemma reminded him that it had north at the top, a scale at the bottom, and labels written in ink. He countered that ink could be deceptive. Gemma let the silence settle before she answered, because silence was often more precise than a ruler. Only when held upside down. One guard made a sound like a dying kettle. Kalen did not look away from Gemma. His face was all noble restraint. His ears, if he had been in wolf form, would have betrayed him. Gemma felt sure of that. She had spent enough years around wolf nobles to know that the body always found one place to be honest. His chosen place as a man seemed to be his left hand. It flexed once against the hilt of his sword. Not in anger, in embarrassment. Gemma softened by exactly 1 inch. 1 inch was generous before breakfast. Your Majesty, the first line of stakes is wrong, but not beyond repair. If we move the eastern run back toward the old beach ridge, the wall remains fully on Thornmere land. Kalen's gaze sharpened. How far has it drifted? Far enough that your masons would have built a respectable fortification for Baron Velric. The Alpha King stared at her. The pigs stared too, though less intelligently. Gemma folded the map. On the bright side, the Baron would have been surprised. That was the first time Kalen nearly smiled. Nearly was important. It did not reach his mouth. It moved through his eyes like a crack in ice, there and gone before anyone else in the yard could claim they had seen it. Gemma saw it. She saw everything useful. We will review the line personally, Kalen said. His voice regained its command. The guards relaxed because men liked orders better than uncertainty. Gemma tucked the map under her arm. She would need her measuring chain, marker flags, 3 assistants, and the authority to correct every stake. No assistants. Then the work will take longer. Kalen held his face still, though the edge of his pride had clearly found a stone. No assistants, Kalen repeated. Lower this time. His alpha presence nudged the morning again. Gemma understood the message beneath the words. He did not want the council, the masons, the neighboring baron, or the entire castle knowing that the famed Mistwood Alpha King had nearly gifted a wall to another lord. She considered making him say it. Then she considered the border, the nervous guards, and the fact that she did not enjoy diplomatic disputes before lunch. Fine, she said. No assistance. She added that if she carried the measuring chain alone, she would charge double. Kalen blinked. The border treasury will compensate you. And I choose the route. His jaw tightened. Master Varel. Gemma lifted the compass. Your Majesty, you just pointed at pigs. The rooster screamed again. No one in the yard moved. Then Kalen turned toward the misted gate with the solemn dignity of a man being escorted to execution by a woman with a measuring chain. Very well, he said. You choose the route. Gemma followed, trying not to smile. The first hour of fieldwork revealed that the Alpha King was not lost in the ordinary sense. Ordinary lost men wandered. Kalen advanced. He moved through the morning fog with such confidence that even wrong directions looked briefly persuasive. He crossed muddy ground without slipping. He noticed broken reeds, old hoof prints, and the place where a fox had passed under the fence before Gemma saw any sign. His wolf senses were excellent. His awareness of living terrain was superb. Unfortunately, None of that helped him when the question was whether a straight legal boundary should run 30 paces west of a survey stone placed in the reign of King Aldrin. Kalen could track a wounded stag through rain. He could not accept that a dotted line was not a stream. Gemma learned this while they stood beside the first incorrect stake, a red-painted post hammered into soft earth near a thorn hedge. Fog curled around their boots. Crows muttered from the branches above. The air smelled of wet leaves, cold mud, and the faint smoke of the castle chimneys behind them. Kalen examined the stake. It is close enough. Gemma looked at him over the top of her notes. He held her gaze. Close enough, she repeated. The crows went quiet, perhaps sensing danger. For a temporary marker, Kalen clarified. Your Majesty, close enough is how people build gates into ponds. The mist moved around them, patient and unhelpful. Has that happened? Twice. Once to a chapel. He looked briefly impressed despite himself. Gemma planted her own marker 37 paces west. She did it with crisp efficiency, driving the thin blue flag into the ground and tying it with a knot that would survive rain. Kalen watched as if she were performing a form of warfare he had not studied. You trust blue cloth more than a sharpened stake. I trust measurements. For a moment, even the nearby guards seemed to be studying the ground with scholarly devotion. The land does not care about measurements. Neighboring lords do. That answer reached him. Kalen looked east, where the fog hid Baron Velric's border fields. The wind shifted, and his nostrils flared. Gemma could almost see the wolf in him reading the land by scent. Moist soil, old ash from a distant hearth, deer trail, human road, territory as a living thing. She understood why parchment offended him. A map flattened all that life into lines. It also kept people from accidentally building walls in other people's oats. They moved on. The measuring chain was heavy, brass-linked, and cold enough to bite through gloves. Gemma carried one end and ordered Kalen to hold the other. He accepted the chain like a warrior accepting a sacred banner, then immediately walked 3 paces too far because his stride was designed for battlefields, not survey intervals. Stop, Gemma called. Kalen stopped. Back 2 paces. He moved back 1. 1 more. He moved half. Gemma inhaled. The smell of wet iron from the chain filled her nose. The smell of alpha pride filled the rest of the world. Your Majesty, your paces are not legally binding. Kalen looked down at his boots. For a moment, the mist softened him. He seemed less like the border's stone-faced defender and more like a man who had never needed anyone to explain that his body occupied more space than a surveyor's measure allowed. He moved the final half pace. Better? He asked. Acceptable. Gemma made a small note in her book, mostly to give her mouth time to behave. That sounded painful. Praise often is. His mouth gave the smallest twitch. Gemma wrote the measurement down before her own face could betray her. By midday, they had corrected 4 stakes, offended 1 crow, and confirmed that the wall line was wrong in a pattern too consistent to be random. It curved east whenever the terrain grew foggy and turned south whenever the map required a hard left. The pattern told Gemma more than any confession could have. Kalen had not delegated badly. He had corrected the first survey himself. He had trusted his senses over the map and forced the line to follow what felt like territory. On an open battlefield, that instinct might have saved lives. On a legal boundary, it nearly gave Baron Velric a free wall. They stopped near a cluster of 5 birches to eat. The trees stood in a shallow dip, their white bark peeling in pale strips. Someone had carved old hunting marks into 2 trunks. Fog lay thickest there, trapped between roots and low brush. Gemma sat on a fallen log and unwrapped bread, cheese, and dried apples from her satchel. Kalen remained standing with one hand on his sword, scanning the mist. She bit into the bread. If you are watching for ambushes, there are none. You cannot know that. Kalen considered that with the grave attention of a man negotiating with the concept of direction. No hostile force would choose this place. There are only 5 trees. Fog conceals numbers. The measuring chain gave a faint clink between them. Not enough numbers to make 5 trees into a forest. Kalen looked toward the birches. His expression suggested he did not trust them. Gemma offered him an apple slice. He took it after a pause, as if accepting food from a cartographer required treaty terms. For 5 minutes, they ate in silence. It was not unpleasant. The fog beaded on Kalen's dark hair and along the edges of his armor. Without guards or councilmen, his alpha presence changed. It was still strong, but less like a command and more like a low fire banked under ash. Gemma's beta senses noticed the shift. Her practical mind noticed the way he held the apple slice with unnecessary caution, as if dried fruit might expose weakness. She decided not to make the obvious comment. She was not cruel. All the time. After lunch, Kalen insisted he could find the next old survey stone. Gemma let him try. She did this for several reasons. First, she wanted to see how his instincts worked. Second, arguing would waste time. Third, the stone was less than 200 paces away, and even a very proud alpha could not become too lost among 5 birches. This assumption was her first professional error of the day. Kalen led them into the fog with grave certainty. They passed the first birch, the one with the split root. They passed the second, marked by a lightning scar. They passed the third, where a raven had left white droppings on a low branch. Then they passed the first birch again. Gemma said nothing. Kalen's stride did not slow. They passed the second birch again. Gemma took out her notebook. They passed the third birch. The raven had returned. It watched Kalen with bright black eyes and the expression of a creature enjoying unpaid theater. Gemma wrote, "First loop. Subject confident." Kalen stopped near the fourth birch and lifted his chin. "The stone is close, is it?" Her compass needle trembled, then settled with no sympathy for noble feelings. "I can smell old moss." "Your Majesty, every stone in this county smells of old moss." He moved on. Second loop. Gemma tied a red thread around the split root birch as they passed. Kalen noticed the motion. "What are you doing?" "Making friends." The raven overhead shifted on its branch, looking far too entertained. "With a tree? It has been more consistent than some guides." He gave her a narrow look and continued. Third loop. The red thread appeared through the fog. Kalen stopped. Gemma looked at it, then at him. "A similar tree," he said. "With my thread?" Gemma adjusted the edge of the parchment before the conversation could become too pleased with itself. "Mistwood is strange. Apparently, it borrows sewing supplies." The raven made a rough sound overhead. It was not laughter. It was close. Kalen glared at the bird. They walked again. Fourth loop. Gemma tied a blue thread to the lightning-scarred birch. Fifth loop. Kalen insisted old scent trails were crossing. Sixth loop. Gemma offered him water. He refused. Seventh loop. He accepted the water. Eighth loop. They arrived before the red-threaded birch, the blue-threaded birch, and the raven, who now seemed emotionally invested. Gemma closed her notebook. Kalen stood very still. The fog curled around his boots. The 5 trees waited with unbearable innocence. Gemma's voice remained gentle, which made it worse. "Your Majesty, would you like to apologize to the birches, or shall I note that they ambushed you?" Kalen turned toward her slowly. His face was magnificent in defeat. Cold, noble, carved from northern stone, and utterly betrayed by geography. "The scent marks are old," he said. "That is true." Kalen looked toward the fog where his dignity had apparently gone to recover. "They cross." "Also true." The archive stove ticked softly, providing the only sensible comment in the room. "The fog thickens low in this hollow." "Correct." A breath of cold air slipped under the door and stirred the map corners. Then this was not a failure of direction. Gemma waited. He looked toward the red thread. It was a complicated terrain assessment. The raven croaked. Gemma pressed her lips together so hard they almost hurt. "I will write that exactly," she promised. Kalen's eyes returned to her. Something in his expression shifted when he saw her trying not to laugh. He did not look angry. He looked wary, then resigned, then oddly helpless. "You may laugh," he said. Gemma shook her head. "I am a professional." "Your profession seems painful." "Often." The laugh escaped anyway. It came out small at first, then warmer, carried by mist and relief. Gemma laughed into her glove, not cruelly, but helplessly. The raven fluffed itself as if applauding. Kalen watched her with the stillness of a man hearing something unexpected. Her laughter faded when she saw his face. He was not offended. He was listening. That unsettled her more than his alpha pressure. Then his own mouth moved. Not a full smile. Not yet. But the corner lifted, and the frozen severity of him cracked just enough to let warmth show through. "Do not write 8 loops," he said. Gemma returned to her notebook. "Of course not." He relaxed. She wrote, 8 loops. Subject negotiated. They found the survey stone 9 minutes later. It had been behind the 5th birch. Kaelin stared at it for a long time. Gemma pretended to inspect Lichen while he recovered his soul. The next week established a routine that Thornmere Castle misunderstood almost immediately. Every morning, Gemma met Kaelin in the outer yard or map room. Every morning, he arrived dressed for a military campaign, even when the task involved measuring a garden wall. Every morning, she arrived with field tools, spare chalk, and the expression of a woman prepared to correct reality. The castle staff watched from windows, doorways, stable arches, and once from behind a laundry cart. People loved a mystery. They loved it even more when the mystery involved a stern alpha king carrying a measuring chain because a beta woman told him to. Officially, they were reviewing the defensive line. Unofficially, Thornmere Castle began placing bets on how long King Kaelin would go before walking the wrong way. Gemma did not approve. She also did not interfere until someone set the wagering board beside her map cabinet. The board listed locations: Pigsty, Westgate, Chapel, Kitchen, Old Well, Baron's Land, and Tragic Unknown. Someone had placed 3 buttons under Kitchen. Gemma removed the board. It reappeared 2 hours later with a new category: Master Varel finds him first. That category had the most buttons. Kaelin discovered the board by accident. He had come to the archive to ask about the second ridge marker, though Gemma suspected he already knew the answer and merely wanted a reason to stand near her drafting table. His eyes found the board before she could hide it behind a stack of elevation notes. The room went silent. The map archive smelled of parchment, ink, dust, and the faint lavender sachets Gemma used to keep moths away from older survey rolls. Winter light fell through narrow windows onto shelves of rolled maps. A kettle hissed near the small iron stove. Kaelin read the categories. His face became so blank that it looped back around to expressive. Tragic Unknown, he said. Gemma rubbed the bridge of her nose. I did not make it. There are 7 buttons under Kitchen. The kitchen is popular. Gemma kept her expression professional by force and long practice. Why? Because last Tuesday you entered it while looking for the East Tower. His eyes narrowed. I was inspecting supply routes. You left with a meat pie. Supply quality matters. Gemma took the board and placed it face down on her desk. Kaelin kept looking at it. Master Varel finds him first, he read from memory. Your Majesty. Kaelin lowered his gaze to the map, as though the ink might offer him support. That category has the most confidence. The staff trusts my work. He looked at her. The kettle hissed louder. Gemma realized, with some alarm, that he was not angry. Embarrassed, yes. Proud, certainly. But underneath both was a strange softness, as if being found by her had become less humiliating than he wanted to admit. She turned toward the stove before her face could misbehave. Tea? She asked. You are changing the subject. The pause stretched just long enough to become funny. Successfully? No. Pella, nearby, pretended not to hear with heroic incompetence. Then tea is necessary. He accepted a cup. Kaelin did not fit naturally in the archive. He was too tall for the low beams, too armored for the narrow aisles, too alive for a room full of flattened land. Yet, after that morning, he came often. He claimed the border revisions required review. Gemma pointed out that he could send a clerk. He told her he did not trust clerks with fog. She told him fog did not read reports. He came anyway. At first, he stood beside the large central table and watched her draw. Gemma worked with a steady hand, ruling borders, shading ridges, marking streams with blue ink and roads with brown. She felt his attention like warmth near her shoulder. It should have annoyed her. It did annoy her. It also made her sit straighter. One afternoon, he leaned too close over a map of the southern farms. His scent touched her. Pine, cold rain, leather, and the faint metallic trace of his armor. Her beta senses noticed the alpha in him again, the deep rank and strength that made the air seem to choose him first. Her fingers paused on the ruler. Kalen noticed the pause and stepped back at once. That was new. The first day, he had filled the yard without thinking. Now he watched himself around her. He folded his power down, not because she demanded it, but because he had learned she worked better when the room did not feel like it needed to bow. Gemma resumed the line. "You are improving," she said. He looked at the map. At direction? At not making my ink nervous. His mouth almost smiled. A high achievement. For an alpha. Remarkable. He turned toward the window, but not before she saw the warmth in his face. The next major failure happened indoors. That was important because it proved the problem was not fog. Kalen was due at a council meeting in the East Tower. Gemma had been asked to attend for the final portion when the revised wall route would be discussed. She arrived early, carrying 2 map tubes and a rolled elevation chart. The council chamber was empty except for Lord Merritt, the steward, who looked worried. "Master Varel," he said, "have you seen King Thornmere?" Gemma stopped. The East Tower smelled of beeswax, cold stone, and mild political fear. "He is not here?" "Not yet." The meeting bell had rung 5 minutes earlier. Gemma closed her eyes. "Did anyone see which staircase he took?" Lord Merritt hesitated. That hesitation answered the question. Gemma set the maps on the table and walked out. She found Kalen 12 minutes later in the West Kitchen, standing between flour sacks and a table of cooling pies. He wore full formal armor, a dark cloak, and the expression of a man personally betrayed by architecture. 3 kitchen maids pretended to work. The cook did not pretend. She was packing 6 small pies into a cloth. Kalen turned when Gemma entered. For one breath, he looked relieved. Then he remembered pride. "I was inspecting the emergency provisions." Gemma looked at the pies. "With your council cloak?" "Emergencies can be formal." The cook shoved the bundle of pies into his hands. "For the meeting, Your Majesty." Kalen accepted them because refusing would have required explaining why he was in the kitchen in the first place. Gemma took pity on him only after enjoying the image properly. "This way." She led him through the back passage, up the narrow stairs, across the west gallery, and through the connecting hall to the East Tower. He followed in silence, carrying pies and the remains of his dignity. At the chamber door, she paused. "Would you like me to take those?" Kalen looked down at the bundle. "No." "Strategic provisions?" The room smelled of ink, wool, and a very expensive amount of restraint. "Council morale." The meeting began 6 minutes late and with excellent pies. No one mentioned the delay. Everyone mentioned the pies. Afterward, Gemma found a folded parchment on her drafting table. It was a route diagram, drawn in Kalen's severe hand. Office to East Tower. Corridor. Left at Wolf Banner. Right after second window. Do not enter kitchen. At the bottom, he had written, "Review for accuracy." Gemma corrected 2 turns, added a small drawing of a pie near the wrong door, and returned it. The next morning, he carried the revised route inside his breastplate. She knew, because armor did not usually crinkle. The comedy of the castle could have made him small if Gemma had let it. She did not. That was the line she found herself guarding. It was one thing to tease him in private or allow the staff to chuckle over harmless mistakes. It was another to let courtiers turn his weakness into a weapon. Kalen was not a fool. He was a man whose mind mapped land through scent, movement, weather, and memory rather than ink and scale. He could walk into a forest after snowfall and tell which patrol had passed by, how many horses they led, and whether one soldier was hiding a fever. Gemma saw this clearly during a survey of the Old North Road. They had followed the revised boundary to a broken bridge where mist rose from a shallow stream. The stones were slick. Alder roots gripped the bank. Somewhere nearby, unseen water knocked softly under ice. Gemma unfolded the road chart. Kalen held up one hand. She stopped. His entire body changed, not lost, not uncertain, focused. He crouched near the bank and touched 2 fingers to the mud. Then he leaned toward a bent reed, inhaled, and looked upstream. 3 riders crossed here after midnight, he said. 1 horse limped, not raiders, local, carrying grain sacks. Gemma studied the mud. She saw marks, yes, but not enough to know all that. How? Left hoof dragged, grain dust near the reed, no fear scent, No iron from drawn weapons. He rose and pointed upstream. This time, without a map, he was exact. They used the ford because the bridge plank cracked. Gemma followed him to the ford and found the marks exactly where he said. The realization settled into her with the quiet click of a compass needle finding north. Kalen was not bad at land. He was fluent in a different language. The map was not wrong. Neither was he. The failure was translation. That afternoon, Gemma changed her method. She cleared the archive table, spread a fresh parchment, and placed bowls at each corner. Pine needles in the north bowl, river stones in the east, hearth ash in the south, iron nails in the west. Kalen entered, saw the bowls, and stopped. Is this a map or a ritual? Yes. He approached slowly. Gemma tapped the pine needles. North is cold resin and high wind. East is river fog. South is hearth smoke from the lower village. West is iron from the old wall. His eyes moved from bowl to bowl. She drew a square on the parchment. This is not the land, it is a memory device. You already know direction. We are teaching the parchment to speak wolf. For the first time since she had met him, Kalen looked at a map without bracing himself. He sat. Not because she ordered it, because he wanted to understand. They worked until the winter light thinned. Gemma explained scale as running time. 1 inch became the distance a wolf could cross at a steady lope in 10 minutes. A borderline became a scent edge. A dotted road became a path that did not command the land but recorded how bodies moved through it. She replaced abstract labels with layered markers until Kalen began to see the parchment not as a trap, but as a compressed memory of territory. He made mistakes, many mistakes. He confused a stream mark for a road twice, turned the parchment once, and briefly accused the legend of being too smug. Gemma corrected him every time. She did not soften the correction, but she did not make it cruel. By the end of the lesson, he placed one finger on the map and traced the revised wall line correctly from the north ridge to the old beach boundary. The room seemed to hold its breath. Kalen looked at his own hand. It was only a line. It was not only a line. Again, Gemma said. He did it again, correctly. His shoulders lowered. The change in him was small but visible, like a door unlatched inside a stone wall. Gemma pretended to organize her pencils. Acceptable. Kalen looked up. That is your highest praise. Not highest. Gemma set one fingertip on the map to anchor both the parchment and her patience. What is highest? She considered him. Stern alpha, border defender, map enemy, pie inspector, man trying hard enough that it made her chest feel unsteady. I have not needed it yet. His smile appeared slowly. It was not the careful almost smile from the mist. It was real enough to make the archive warmer. Gemma looked down before her own expression became public property. From then on, their work became both more useful and more dangerous. Kalen learned quickly once the map made sense in his own terms. He still hated scale bars, but he respected them in the way one might respect a difficult but honorable opponent. He could now identify north on parchment without consulting pigs. He stopped calling detours strategic when Gemma could see the error before he reached the second turn. He also began finding excuses to remain after lessons. Sometimes he claimed the wind markers needed review. Sometimes he brought reports from patrols and asked where they should be annotated. Sometimes he carried a fresh stack of parchment from the supply room because he had noticed Gemma's best sheets were running low. The first time he did that, Gemma stared at the parchment. It was good quality. Smooth, pale, properly stretched. The Treasury approved this? Border security requires accurate materials. Kalen absorbed the correction with the dignity of a man being slowly educated by furniture. Border security requires 12 sheets of calfskin parchment? 15, she counted. 15. He looked out the window. The tips of his ears reddened. Gemma placed the parchment in her top drawer and decided not to mention that she had seen. Acts of care were like hidden paths. Once noticed, they became difficult not to follow. Kalen noticed that she sharpened her charcoal to needle points and began leaving fresh blades near her desk. He noticed that she forgot meals when working. Soon, trays began appearing in the archive under the official explanation of survey endurance. He noticed that her left wrist ached after long drafting sessions. After that, heavy map chests moved before she needed them. Gemma noticed him noticing. She also noticed that he never made a performance of it. For a man so large, so titled, and so burdened with alpha presence, Kalen could be surprisingly quiet when kindness mattered. He did not burst into rooms announcing his support. He placed the ink where she could reach it. He corrected a loose window latch so the draft stopped bending her corner notes. He stood between the archive door and talkative visitors when her concentration was thin. That last one became a problem. One afternoon, Lord Perrick, the same councilman who believed roughly adjacent was a measurement, tried to enter the archive with suggestions for the wall route. Kalen happened to be present, studying the revised boundary chart. Gemma heard Perrick's voice in the corridor and felt her soul attempt to leave her body. Kalen looked up. He had never met Lord Perrick. He did not need to. When Perrick opened the door, he found the Alpha King of Mistwood standing in front of the map table with one hand on a rolled survey and the full weight of Alpha attention pointed at him. Perrick's suggestion died before reaching air. "I can return later," the councilman said. Kalen nodded once. Perrick returned never. Gemma kept her eyes on the map. That was efficient. He smelled of opinions. Many do. The ducks in the distance made a noise that did nothing for his authority. His were damp. She laughed so suddenly that her pencil slipped. Kalen caught it before it rolled off the table. Their fingers brushed. The contact lasted less than a second. Gemma felt it for the rest of the afternoon. Slow burn romance, she was learning, did not always come with moonlight and declarations. Sometimes it arrived as a rescued pencil and an alpha describing a councilman's opinions as damp. The next stage of training required leaving the archive and testing Kalen's new understanding where paper met mud. Gemma chose the lower village road because it was harmless, public, and full of landmarks no reasonable person could confuse. There was a mill with a red roof, a shrine with 3 bells, a stone bridge, a duck pond, and an elderly goat named Madame Tusk, who had bitten 2 tax collectors and 1 visiting poet. If Kalen could follow a mapped route there, he could follow one anywhere inside the border. At least, that was Gemma's theory. The morning began well. Kalen arrived in riding leathers instead of armor, which made him look less like a battlefield and more like a dangerous man attempting casualness. His horse, a dark gray mare named Brindle, stood beside him with the composed expression of an animal who had witnessed too much noble confidence. Gemma unfolded the practice map. Kalen looked at it, then at Brindle. "The horse is not taking the test," she told him. Brindle flicked one ear. Kalen's face remained solemn. "She knows the lower road. That is why she is not taking the test." Brindle made a soft blowing sound through her nose. Gemma chose to interpret it as agreement. They set off on foot, with Brindle following on a loose rein. The lower road wound past frost-stiff hedges and cottage gardens, where smoke rose from chimneys in blue threads. Children stopped chasing each other to stare at the Alpha King walking beside the cartographer. A baker paused with flour on both sleeves. 2 village women leaned over a fence with the alert stillness of people discovering that the morning had improved. Kalen noticed every watcher. Gemma noticed him noticing. His posture grew more rigid with each step, which made the exercise worse. He held the map too carefully. He glanced between parchment and road as if one of them might betray him. When they reached the first fork, he stopped under a bare apple tree and studied the inked line. The right path led toward the mill. The left path led toward the duck pond. The map was clear. The mill was visible. The duck pond was making duck noises. Kalen turned left. Gemma waited until his boot touched the wrong path. "Your Majesty?" He stopped. The ducks grew louder, perhaps sensing opportunity. Kalen looked at the map again, then at the mill, then at the ducks. "The pond is not on the map," he said. "It is." Gemma pointed to a small blue oval. He stared at it with restrained offense. "That is a smudge. That is a pond. It lacks ducks." Brindle flicked an ear, contributing silently to the case against him. Most maps do. Brindle lowered her head and began eating frost-browned grass, giving the impression of a horse with no faith in aristocracy. Gemma corrected the route and made him turn toward the mill. He did it with dignity, but the village women at the fence whispered so intensely that a few words escaped. Gemma caught poor lamb, which seemed directed at Kalen. She also caught fine shoulders, which unfortunately seemed directed at him too. He heard both. His ears reddened. Gemma wrote a note in her field book. Pond symbol requires duck education. At the second landmark, the shrine bells caused another delay. The map showed 3 small circles beside the road. Kalen identified them as stones. Gemma explained they were bells. He asked why bells were drawn as circles. She asked how he would draw bells from above. He opened his mouth, paused, and looked at the shrine roof as though it had failed him. They stood there long enough for the shrine keeper to come out and ask if the Alpha King wished to pray. Kalen looked at Gemma. Gemma looked at the map. The shrine keeper looked at both of them and wisely retreated. By the time they reached Madame Tusk's field, Kalen had correctly followed 4 turns and incorrectly accused 2 cart tracks of being streams. Gemma considered that progress. Then the goat trotted to the fence. Madame Tusk was old, white, square, and built like a retired siege weapon. She fixed Kalen with yellow eyes and chewed with slow contempt. Kalen stopped. Gemma folded her arms. Do not tell me the goat is blocking your sense of direction. That goat is hostile. That goat is locally respected. Gemma looked at the road, then at the map, and let the evidence introduce itself. It is assessing my weakness. So am I, and you still follow my directions. Brindle stepped behind Gemma, abandoning her rider without shame. Madame Tusk butted the fence. The wooden rail rattled. Kalen took 1 careful step back. The village children watching from the lane gasped in delight. One small boy whispered that the goat had defeated the Alpha King. Gemma pretended not to hear. Kalen very clearly heard and looked at the horizon with the pain of a man who had survived battle only to be judged by children and livestock. The route test ended with partial success. Kalen reached the mill, shrine, bridge, and old market cross correctly. He avoided the duck pond after the first incident. He gave Madame Tusk a wide berth, which Gemma marked as reasonable caution rather than cowardice. On the return trip, Brindle took the lead without being asked and brought them directly to the castle gate. Kalen looked at the mare. Brindle looked back. Their silence contained an argument. Gemma patted the horse's neck. She may attend the next lesson as a consultant. Kalen did not answer. Brindle looked smug. The village route gave Gemma a new idea. Kalen needed maps that respected motion. He did not think in still lines. He thought in travel, scent, danger, weather, and memory. So she began building layered route cards. Each card showed 1 path in 3 ways: the legal map line, the scent sequence, and the physical landmarks. A road became not just brown ink, but chimney smoke, alder mud, 3 bends, cold wind, sheep field, and bridge stones. A tower became not just a square, but iron hinges, raven nests, old lime wash, and the echo of boots. The work fascinated him. It also made him terrible company for anyone trying to pass quietly through the castle. For 3 days, Kalen tested the new method with fierce dedication. He stopped in corridors to smell hinges. He stood under stairwells and listened to echoes. He asked a startled maid whether the East Gallery always smelled faintly of lemon wax or only on Wednesdays. He informed Lord Merritt that the council chamber route would improve if the West Corridor were less aggressively perfumed. Lord Merritt came to Gemma afterward with the exhausted look of a steward whose Alpha King had discovered sensory cartography. Gemma apologized without meaning it. The new route cards worked. They worked so well that Kalen began helping her refine them. He marked places where the map showed a turn but the body felt a slope. He described fog pockets, invisible from the walls. He identified where old wolf patrol scent marks might mislead younger guards. He knew things no human surveyor would know. Once Gemma found the correct shape for that knowledge, the border map became better than anything she could have drawn alone. That discovery pleased her. It also frightened her a little. She was used to defending her work against interference. She was not used to wanting someone's observations in the margins. Kalen's notes were severe, exact, and occasionally absurd. He once described one low meadow as smelling too round. Gemma had stared at the phrase for a full minute before walking the meadow herself and realizing that the circling wind did make it feel enclosed. She did not tell him he was right. She changed the contour shading. He noticed the next morning. He did not gloat. That was worse. Instead, he placed a small cup of tea beside her elbow and said nothing at all. The tea had milk, no honey, and exactly the amount of warmth she preferred when working before dawn. Gemma looked at the cup, then at him. Kalen studied the wall map with exaggerated interest. There were many ways to unsettle a woman. Gemma had expected alpha commands, noble entitlement, perhaps a little handsome brooding. She had not prepared herself for tea accuracy. The castle, meanwhile, adjusted to the new partnership with the subtlety of a parade drum. The wagering board disappeared from the archive after Gemma threatened to redraw the offenders' bedrooms as public footpaths. It reappeared in the laundry room, where the laundress operated a far more organized system. Categories now included Alpha King reaches destination unaided, Alpha King reaches destination with horse assistance, Alpha King claims strategic detour, and Master Virel smiles when he is not looking. That last category became controversial. Pella, the archive assistant, insisted smiles should only count if visible from the side. The cook argued that shoulder softening should count as a smile for women with difficult faces. The stable boy claimed Brindle could identify emotional shifts better than people and should serve as judge. Brindle, when consulted, attempted to eat the corner of the board. Gemma discovered the system because a laundry maid accidentally delivered the tally cloth with her clean gloves. She read the categories in silence. Then she walked to the laundry room. Every woman there suddenly became very busy folding sheets. Gemma set the tally cloth on the table. No one breathed. Master Varel smiles when he is not looking, Gemma read aloud. The cook, who had no official reason to be in the laundry room, stared at a stack of towels. Pella whispered that the category was statistically important. Gemma looked at the chalk marks. There were many. Far too many. She considered reprimanding them. She considered confiscating the board. She considered denying everything. Then Kalen appeared in the doorway behind her, having followed her trail from the archive with the unfortunate efficiency of a man improving. He saw the tally cloth. He saw the category. He saw the marks. The laundry room achieved a silence normally found only in chapels and disaster reports. Gemma closed her eyes. Kalen's voice came from behind her, controlled and far too calm. What is the current count? Pella made a small sound. The cook answered because cooks feared no ruler fully, especially not one who had accepted emergency pies. She said the number. Kalen looked at Gemma. Gemma looked at the towels. The towels offered no help. He did not smile. That would have been easier. Instead, he looked quietly pleased, which was unforgivable. Gemma took the chalk from the table and added a new category at the bottom of the cloth. Alpha King becomes smug and loses all privileges. Then she made one firm mark beneath it. The laundry room erupted. Kalen laughed under his breath and stepped aside to let her leave with dignity. She managed the doorway, the corridor, and half the stairwell before laughing too. After that, the castle's gossip grew warmer rather than sharper. People still teased. They still watched. But the mockery had changed into affection, and Gemma found herself less defensive. Kalen was not being reduced by the laughter. He was being accepted into it. That mattered. It mattered because he had spent years being respected from a distance. The border loved him as a wall, a sword, a winter shield. They trusted his strength. They did not know what to do with his embarrassment, his care, his strange conflict with duck ponds. Gemma had worried that public humor would wound him. Instead, used gently, it gave people permission to see him as more than the cold alpha who kept danger outside the gates. It gave him permission, too. One afternoon, during a storm that turned the courtyard into a gray sheet of rain, Kalen entered the archive carrying 3 route cards, 2 wet gloves, and an expression of grave triumph. He had gone from the armory to the north watchtower without a wrong turn. Gemma was bent over the final elevation chart and did not immediately look up. He placed the route card on her desk. It was dry, his gloves were not. His hair was wet at the ends, and rain had darkened his coat. He smelled of cold stone, iron, and the sharp, clean scent of success trying not to announce itself. Gemma inspected the route card. No corrections. She inspected him. He waited. The moment deserved ceremony. It also deserved honesty. Gemma took her official red correction pencil and drew a tiny star in the corner. Kalen stared at it. A star, she told him, means no diplomatic damage occurred. He looked at the card for a long time. I will preserve it. Please do not frame it. His silence was immediate and suspicious. Gemma set the pencil down. Your Majesty. A small frame. No. Kalen stood very straight, which was usually how he admitted trouble without words. In my private office. Still no. The old stone wall beside them held its peace, unlike everyone else. For morale. Your morale is becoming expensive. He looked genuinely disappointed. She lasted 4 seconds before adding that he might keep it in a drawer. The relief on his face was absurdly satisfying. That evening, she found the card already tucked into the inside cover of his field journal. The tiny red star showed whenever he opened it. He did not mention it. She did not mention it. Some things were better allowed to sit quietly between people, glowing in their own ridiculous way. The more Kalen improved, the more Gemma understood the shape of his loneliness. It was not dramatic. He did not sigh into moonlight or speak of broken hearts. His loneliness lived in practical habits. He always stood where he could see exits. He answered praise with duty. He expected every weakness to become a weapon if left uncovered. When he made mistakes, his first instinct was not to laugh or ask for help, but to brace for disappointment. Gemma recognized that kind of loneliness. Hers lived in different habits. She double-checked every calculation because one female beta mistake would be remembered longer than 10 male guesses. She kept her tools in perfect order because disorder gave critics something to discuss. She accepted extra work because refusing sounded ungrateful when one was already considered unusual. They were both, in their own ways, tired of proving they deserved the room they stood in. This truth surfaced during a late survey of the West Ravine. The ravine cut behind the castle like a long, dark seam. In summer, it filled with bracken and bees. In winter, it held cold air, old leaves, and the mineral smell of exposed stone. Gemma needed one final height measurement for the defensive line. Callan insisted on accompanying her because the path was slick, the light was fading, and he had apparently decided that cliffs were more trustworthy when personally supervised. They reached the overlook just as sunset turned the fog pink. Gemma set the measuring rod, checked the angle, and wrote down the figure. Callan stood nearby, watching the tree line below. For once, neither made a joke. The quiet was not heavy. It was spacious. Gemma could hear water far below, the soft tap of droplets falling from branches, and Callan's slow breathing beside her. His presence no longer pushed at her beta instincts the way it had in the pigsty yard. Or perhaps she had learned the difference between his power and his care. He had learned, too. He never stood too close without warning. He no longer let alpha pressure fill small rooms. When he wanted her attention, he used her name, not command. It should not have felt intimate, but it did. Gemma packed the measuring rod. Kalen spoke while still facing the valley. When I was young, my father made me lead patrols by scent before I was allowed to read tactical reports. She listened. He said parchment made wolves lazy. Land should be carried in the blood. Gemma slid the rod into its case. And did you believe him? Yes, the answer came without pride. Then I came here, he continued, and every councilman had a map. Every mason wanted a line. Every envoy wanted proof. My blood knew where Thornmere ended. The parchment did not agree. Gemma looked at his profile. Sunset caught on the edge of his cheek and the damp curve of his hair. For once, the Cold King looked not lost, but young in the way people become young when admitting where old lessons failed them. Your blood knew one truth, she said. The parchment needed another. He turned toward her. You make it sound simple. It is not simple. It is why I have employment. His mouth softened. She tightened the strap on her field satchel. Your father was wrong about maps making wolves lazy. Maps are not a replacement for instinct. They are a way to share memory with people who do not have your nose. Kaelin breathed out slowly. Below them, fog moved through the ravine like a pale river. You never make me feel foolish for not knowing, he said. Gemma thought of the pigsty, the ducks, Madame Tusk, the kitchen, the laundry board, and the 8 loops around 5 birches. That is not entirely true. He looked down at her. You never make me feel worthless, he corrected. That answer had no easy joke attached. Gemma's fingers tightened on the satchel strap. Good, she said, quieter than she meant. They walked back before the light failed. Kaelin took the correct path without checking the card. Gemma noticed but did not praise him aloud. Halfway to the castle, she slipped her hand around his arm, just above the leather bracer. He went still for 1 step. Then he adjusted his pace to hers. Neither spoke. The map case bumped softly against her hip. His arm was warm under her hand. Ahead, Thornmere Castle glowed through the mist, not perfectly straight, not perfectly safe, but known. For the first time, Gemma wondered whether a person could become a kind of landmark. Not a destination, not a possession, a fixed point by which the rest of the world became easier to read. She did not say that. She was not a poet. She was a cartographer. But when Kaelin glanced down at her hand on his arm, the small, stunned warmth in his face suggested he understood enough. The border work continued toward its public confirmation. The final route had to be approved before the wall could be built. The Treaty Council's envoy would attend. Baron Velric would send a representative from across the border. Thornmere's council, masons, guard captains, and village elders would gather in the outer field where the old survey stone marked the lawful edge. The event was supposed to be simple. This meant it would not be. Kaelin was required to present the revised map himself. Gemma learned this from Lord Merritt, who entered the archive looking as though he had swallowed a bee. The council believes it will show confidence, the steward explained. Gemma glanced toward Kaelin. He stood by the window, motionless. The map in his hand did not shake. Everything else in the room seemed to. She dismissed the steward with a promise that the presentation would be ready. When the door closed, silence settled over the archive. The stove ticked. Wind pressed faintly at the glass. Ink dried in its pot. Kaelin did not turn around. Gemma knew better than to rush him. Eventually, he spoke. They want the border to see I trust the line. Yes. Gemma took a measured breath and chose mercy for approximately 3 seconds. They want Baron Velric to see I understand the correction. Also, yes. Kaelin waited, wearing patience like armor that had never quite been fitted. They want no hint that the first survey nearly gave him a wall. Strongly, yes. His shoulders remained still. And if I misread the map? There it was, not arrogance, not refusal. Fear, buried under armor until it became stone. Gemma closed the distance between them, stopping beside the window. Outside, the training yard lay under a thin skin of frost. Men drilled with spears in neat lines. Beyond the wall, mistwood fog lifted from the trees, like breath. Then I will be there. Kaelin's laugh was very quiet and not amused. That is what I fear. Gemma looked up at him. His profile was severe against the pale window. He looked older than 30 in that moment, not by years, but by expectation. You fear me seeing you wrong? You have seen me wrong many times. The candles trembled in the draft, making the map shadows shift. 8 loops. His mouth moved despite himself. I fear needing you in public, he said. There is a difference. Gemma understood before she wanted to. Private need could be wrapped in teasing. Public need became a weapon if the wrong people held it. Kaelin had been raised to be an alpha who knew, led, defended, and never hesitated where others could see. His body could command a field by entering it. His title could silence rooms. His weakness, if named without care, could become proof that strength had been an illusion. Gemma had lived the other side of that trap. As a beta woman in a map room full of men who liked their mistakes drawn softly, she had learned to be exact because softness was taken as permission. She had learned not to apologize for correction. She had also learned the loneliness of being valued only when useful. Your Majesty, she said, You do not need me because you are weak. He turned toward her. You need a cartographer because maps are a craft. I would not command a border patrol by scent. You should not be expected to read every line without training. His eyes held hers. She made her voice lighter because the room had grown too honest. Also, if you panic, remember that north is not the pigsty. The corner of his mouth lifted. That lesson has stayed with me. Good. It was expensive for everyone. They practiced every evening after that. Not in the council chamber, where walls had ears and every ear belonged to someone with an opinion. They practiced in the archive, the yard, the garden paths, and once in the kitchen, because Kalen insisted that he could now reach the East Tower without error. He reached the kitchen again. Gemma did not say anything. The cook handed him 2 rolls. Kalen accepted them with the air of a man surrendering to fate. Training became a series of small victories. He learned to orient the map before reading it. He learned not to rotate himself instead of the parchment, which had caused one memorable incident with a chair. He learned that legends were not insults. He learned to mark uncertainty instead of covering it with confidence. Gemma learned things too. She learned that Kalen murmured under his breath when concentrating, not words exactly, but fragments of scent memory. Pine, smoke, iron, river. She learned that he hated being watched by people who hoped he would fail, but could bear being watched by her. She learned that when he understood something fully, his whole face settled, as if a restless wolf inside him had found ground. She learned that she liked teaching him. That was inconvenient. She liked the way he listened with his entire attention. She liked the way he never blamed the map once he understood it. She liked the way he tried to make her laugh when she grew tired, usually by offering an extremely serious analysis of whether staircases should be required to state their intentions. The council insisted on a rehearsal 3 days before the public confirmation, which proved that councils could create danger even when everyone involved had survived the actual border. The rehearsal took place in the old guard hall because it had enough space for the map stand, the council chairs, the masons, the envoy's table, and Lord Perrick's opinions. Rain struck the high windows in uneven bursts. The room smelled of damp wool, floor rushes, candle smoke, and the anxious polish of furniture recently dragged from better rooms. Gemma arrived early to set the map stand at the correct angle. Kalen arrived too early, which meant he was nervous. He walked once around the room, stopped near the wrong side of the map stand, looked at the door, looked at the windows, and then pretended he had meant to inspect the chair legs. Gemma let him have the first inspection. He was an alpha, after all. Sometimes dignity needed small, useless jobs. When Lord Merritt brought in the temporary boundary map, Kalen reached to unroll it. Gemma caught his wrist. The room had not filled yet, but 2 guards, 1 mason, and Pella saw it. They also saw Kalen, the feared Alpha King of Mistwood, stop immediately because the cartographer's fingers rested on his sleeve. Wrong side, Gemma murmured. Kalen looked down at the roll. It was upside down. He looked at her. I was testing the stand. The stand failed. Gemma closed the inkpot before anyone could knock over something symbolic. Naturally. Pella turned toward the wall with the expression of a young woman fighting for her life against laughter. The rehearsal began badly and improved only in the sense that a cart stuck in mud improves when one wheel stops spinning. Lord Perrick wanted the wall line described as substantially adjacent to the historical understanding. Gemma explained that walls could not be built on adverbs. The chief mason asked whether the blue flags would remain after construction. Kalen, now focused, answered correctly that the flags were temporary survey markers. Then he looked at Gemma for confirmation and tried to pretend he had not. She gave him the smallest nod. He stood taller. That should not have warmed her. It did. The envoy's clerk, who was standing in for the real envoy, asked where Baron Velrick's representative would sit. Lord Merritt pointed toward the east side of the hall. Kalen pointed west. Every head turned. For one tragic second, the room balanced on the edge of disaster. Then Brindle, who had no reason to be inside the old guard hall except that the stable boy had claimed she offered emotional support, pushed her head through the side door and sneezed. The entire room looked at the horse. Gemma used the distraction to slide the seating marker to the correct side. Kaylin lowered his hand with grave composure. West for the horses, she whispered as she passed him. East for the Baron. The horse was not on the plan. The field around them was quiet enough to hear frost soften under boots. She rarely is. Brindle sneezed again, then withdrew as if satisfied with her contribution to diplomacy. The rehearsal continued. Kaylin traced the map line correctly twice. He named the old beach ridge, the frost hollow, the lawful ford, and the corrected eastern bend. He only hesitated once, at the very point where the first wrong stakes had crossed too far. Gemma saw the hesitation. So did Lord Perrick, whose expression sharpened with the hungry brightness of a man who collected other people's uncertainty. Before Perrick could speak, Gemma dropped her field pencil. It hit the floor with a clean little crack. Everyone looked down. Kaylin's gaze moved to her. Gemma bent, retrieved the pencil, and tapped twice on the map stand as she rose. It was a signal they had practiced without naming it. 2 taps meant orient by scent memory. Pine, river, hearth, iron. Kaylin's hand steadied. He continued correctly. No one else noticed the rescue. Or rather, no one else noticed except Pella, the cook peeking through the door, Brindle's stable boy, and probably every woman in the laundry room by sunrise. After the rehearsal, Kaylin remained in the hall while the council filed out. The old rushes whispered under departing boots. Rain softened to a steady hush against the windows. Gemma gathered the map pins and placed them in their tin box one by one. Kaylin came to stand beside her. You dropped the pencil on purpose. I am shocked by the accusation. Gemma let the quiet stretch, giving accuracy time to arrive before mercy. You never dropped tools. That pencil was overcome by civic duty. His laugh was quiet. Gemma closed the tin. You recovered quickly, because you were there. The words landed more softly than his public voice ever did. She kept her eyes on the pins. On the day itself, I will be there too. I know, but you will not need rescuing. Kaylin looked at the now empty chairs. Without the council, the guard hall seemed larger and less important. He ran one hand along the map stand, touching the spot where the parchment had rested. I used to think certainty meant never needing correction. Gemma waited. Now I think certainty may be knowing whose correction to trust. Her hand stilled over the tin lid. That was far too close to romance for a room that still smelled of Perrick's hair oil. That is a dangerous idea, she said. Why? Kaylin kept his expression level, but his pride had clearly stepped on something sharp. Because if you keep saying reasonable things, I will have fewer opportunities to insult you. Kaylin's expression softened. I would not want to deprive you. Thoughtful. I try. The moment might have become too tender, but Brindle pushed the door open with her nose and entered the hall fully, dragging a length of loose rein behind her. She walked to the map stand, sniffed it, and began chewing Lord Perrick's abandoned seating note. Gemma stared at the horse. Kaylin said, she dislikes his opinions too. She has excellent judgment. Brindle chewed with calm authority. Gemma took the note away before the horse could become legally involved in council records. Kaylin tried to look stern and failed. It was the first time Gemma saw him fail at sternness without embarrassment. The failed sternness stayed with her longer than it should have. The worst moment came 2 nights before the confirmation ceremony. They were in the archive after midnight. Rain tapped the windows. The stove glowed low. The boundary map lay finished beneath weights, its ink dry and perfect. Gemma's wrist ached from final lettering. Kaylin stood beside her. No armor tonight, only a dark wool coat and the quiet scent of rain. He traced the wall line correctly. Then he traced it again without looking at the labels. Gemma nodded. You are ready. He looked at the map, then at her. Because of you. Because you practiced. The mist moved around them, patient and unhelpful. Because you stayed. The words were simple enough to be dangerous. Gemma busied herself with the ink knife. I was paid. Not enough. Nearby, the guards developed a sudden scholarly interest in mud. No one is. His hand came down gently over hers before she could reach for another useless task. He did not grip. He only stopped her motion. The room went very still. Gemma looked at his hand. Large, scarred, careful, a hand used to sword hilts and reins, now resting over ink stains and paper cuts. Gemma. It was the first time he had used her given name in that tone. Not by accident, not in surprise, as if he had chosen it. She looked up. Kalen's face held no court mask now. No cold king, no flawless alpha, no defensive pride. Just a man standing in a map room at midnight, afraid of needing someone and unable to pretend he did not. After the ceremony, he said, I would like to keep seeing you. Her heart did something unprofessional. For border review? No. Gemma lowered her eyes to her notebook until her expression became trustworthy again. For route practice? Likely, but no. Kalen weighed the correction as if direction itself had requested a treaty. For emergency kitchen inspections? His mouth curved. Only if required. Rain moved over the glass. Gemma should have answered cleanly. She was good at clean lines. Instead, she found herself caught between joy, caution, and the old beta habit of checking where power stood in the room. Kalen seemed to feel the hesitation. He withdrew his hand at once. I would not command it. That settled her more than any romantic speech could have. Of course he would not. He had spent weeks learning to ask the map before walking. He could learn to ask her too. Gemma let out a breath. Good, she said, because anything softer would have knocked her off balance. Because if you tried to command my affection, I would draw you a map to the nearest rejection. Kalen stared at her. Then he laughed, not the small court-controlled sound. A real laugh, low and surprised, filling the archive with warmth. Gemma smiled before she could stop herself. After the ceremony, she said, we may discuss it. Discuss. The brass links shifted softly, marking the pause better than either of them could. With terms, naturally. The compass needle steadied, brutally loyal to direction rather than pride. And a route. I expected nothing less. He looked so pleased that she nearly kissed him. She did not. The map lay between them, finished and waiting. The ceremony still stood ahead, public and bright and full of eyes. It was not the right moment. But for the rest of the night, every line on the parchment seemed to point somewhere new. The day of the border confirmation dawned clear, which everyone considered a good sign except Kalen, who distrusted weather that behaved only when watched. The outer field had been swept, marked, and lined with banners. Frost glittered on the grass. The old survey stone sat near the center, cleaned of moss for the first time in decades, and looking deeply surprised by attention. To the north, Mistwood rose dark and fragrant with pine. To the east lay the disputed stretch where the first wall stakes had wandered with excessive confidence. Gemma arrived carrying the final map in a leather tube. She wore her best work dress, dark blue wool with plain cuffs, practical boots, and her compass at her belt. She had refused Pella's suggestion of ribbons because ribbons caught on measuring hooks and made women look available for advice from fools. Kalen stood near the survey stone in black formal armor. He looked every inch the border Alpha King. Cold, composed, handsome in the inconvenient way of winter mountains. His cloak moved in the wind. His sword hilt caught the sun. Guards stood behind him, and the council gathered in careful rows. Only Gemma saw the tiny route parchment tucked beneath his left gauntlet. Office to field. Field to stone. Stone to map stand. Do not face Pigsty. She had added that last line herself. When he saw her, his expression did not change. His shoulders eased. That was enough. The treaty envoy gave a speech about lawful boundaries, mutual respect, and the wisdom of accurate construction. Baron Velric's representative, a round-faced man with clever eyes, made polite comments about avoiding misunderstandings. Lord Perrick nodded gravely as if he had always supported exact measurements and had never once used the phrase roughly adjacent. Gemma stood beside the map stand and listened. The field smelled of frost, horsetack, pine, and nervous nobles. Then Kalen stepped forward. Every conversation died. Alpha presence moved through the field, not crushing, not careless, but unmistakable. The guards straightened. The envoy lifted his chin. Even Baron Velric's representative blinked. Kalen placed both hands on the map stand. For one heartbeat, Gemma felt the old fear from him. Not through magic, not through any special bond, but through human evidence. The pause before speech, the slight stillness in his fingers, the way his gaze found the compass rose first. Then he oriented the map correctly. Gemma almost smiled. He began. His voice carried over the field, deep and steady. He explained the old boundary, the mistaken preliminary stakes, the corrected survey, the new wall line, and the preserved grazing path. He used legal terms where needed. He used terrain terms where useful. When he reached the confusing eastern bend, he described it through both map and land, naming the cold pine ridge, the river fog, and the iron scent of the old wall. People listened, not because he was an alpha, because he understood. Gemma felt pride rise in her chest so fast it almost hurt. He finished the route without error. The envoy approved the map. Baron Velric's representative smiled, perhaps relieved that his lord would not be receiving a surprise wall. The masons murmured over the corrected line. The village elders nodded among themselves. The ceremony should have ended there. Kaelin did not step back. Gemma knew before he spoke that he was about to ruin her composure in public. "This correction was not mine alone," he said. The field quieted again. Gemma's hand tightened around the map tube. Kaelin turned toward her. "Master Gemma Varel found the error, redrew the line, and taught me to read the land in a language my pride had resisted." Lord Perrick looked startled. The steward looked delighted. The kitchen staff, somehow present at the back, leaned forward as one body. Gemma tried to warn Kaelin with her eyes. His expression softened in a way that made warning useless. "I have led patrols through white storms and tracked enemies across frozen stone," he continued. "Yet a parchment map once sent me toward the wrong border, the wrong tower, and, on one difficult morning, the castle pigsty." Laughter rippled across the field. Not cruel laughter, warm laughter, relieved laughter. The kind that turns a flaw into a story instead of a wound. Gemma covered her mouth with the map tube. Kaelin looked only at her. "I thought needing direction would make me smaller. Master Varel proved otherwise. She did not make me less of an alpha. She made me a better lord." The laughter faded into a hush. Wind moved over the frost. Kaelin stepped away from the map stand and came to her before everyone. He did not command the field. He did not use alpha pressure to claim the moment. He simply stopped in front of Gemma with all his strength held carefully in his own hands. "I do not need a map to know where I belong now," he said. "I choose you, Gemma Varel, if you will have me." Gemma stared at him. The entire border seemed to wait. She could have answered sweetly. She could have answered grandly. Unfortunately, she was herself. "Technically," she said, "you still need a map." The field burst into laughter. Kaelin's mouth curved, slow and helpless. "Technically," he agreed, "I still need a map." Gemma stepped closer and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers with visible care. "But yes," she told him, clear enough for the front rows to hear, "I will have you." The sound that rose from the field was not formal applause at first. It began as laughter, then cheers, then the clapping of guards, masons, servants, villagers, and at least one kitchen maid who shouted something about pies before being hushed by the cook. Kaelin bent his head and kissed Gemma's gloved knuckles. It was a proper gesture. It was also the closest he had ever come to lowering his head in public. No one mistook it for weakness. The wall was approved that day. So, unofficially, was Gemma. The first week after the ceremony was unbearable in precisely the way happy things can be unbearable when servants discover them. The kitchen sent pies to the archive with little compass marks cut into the crust. The stable boys saluted Gemma with measuring sticks. Someone tied a ribbon around the pigsty sign that read, "South," in case of emergency. Lord Perrick attempted to congratulate her and became so tangled in respectful wording that Kaelin appeared behind him and simply looked. Perrick fled with the speed of a man discovering a better appointment elsewhere. Gemma pretended to be annoyed. She was annoyed. She was also happy. That was irritating. Kaelin, for his part, became more open about needing maps, which would have been noble if he had not become very proud of it. He carried Gemma's corrected route cards in a leather case. He consulted the compass before meetings. He once stopped in the middle of a corridor, checked a note, turned around, and announced to two startled guards that he had avoided the kitchen by choice. The guards applauded. Kalen accepted this as his due. Gemma told him he was impossible. He told her that was why he required expert supervision. Their first official walk together took place in the castle garden 3 evenings after the ceremony. Frost silvered the hedges. Lanterns burned along the path. The air smelled of rosemary, wet stone, and winter roses trying bravely to survive. Kalen offered his arm with grave courtesy. Gemma took it. They walked past the sundial, the fountain, and the low wall overlooking the lower village. For 10 peaceful minutes, everything went well. Then Kalen turned left at the clipped yew hedge. Gemma looked at the path. She looked at him. He continued with great confidence. The path ended at the stable yard. A horse snorted at them over a half door. Kalen stopped. The horse chewed hay and judged him. Gemma waited. Kalen stared at the stable. "Romantic detour," he said. Gemma leaned her head against his arm and laughed until the horse lost interest. He looked down at her, half proud and half embarrassed, all his cold dignity softened by lantern light. There was still alpha strength in him. There always would be. It lived in his bones, his scent, his command, and the way the world leaned toward him when he entered a room. But now there was something else too. Trust. Not the grand, public kind spoken before banners and border stones. The smaller kind. The kind that let a man admit the garden had defeated him. The kind that let a woman laugh without fear of wounding him. The kind that could survive wrong turns because neither of them had to pretend the path was perfect. Gemma drew the compass from her belt and pressed it into his palm. Garden is that way. Kalen looked at the compass, then at the stable, then at her. If I say I knew that, I will ask the horse to testify. The horse snorted again. Kalen accepted defeat. They turned back toward the lantern path, hand in hand this time. The castle rose behind them, warm-windowed and noisy with supper. Beyond the walls, the border lay properly measured at last, blue flags marking the future line of stone. No part of the wall would enter Baron Velric's land. No pigsty would be mistaken for north. No Alpha King would have to pretend that dotted lines were streams, at least not while Gemma was nearby. Kalen squeezed her hand. Stay beside me? Gemma glanced up at him. He was not asking for the path. Not only the path. Her answer came easily. If you keep listening when I say left. Always. Above them, the raven tilted its head like a critic with excellent seats. And if you admit when you are lost. His silence lasted exactly 2 steps. Eventually. Gemma laughed again. That was acceptable. Eventually was not perfect, but maps were revised all the time. They reached the correct garden path before the lanterns burned low. Kalen did not pretend he had meant to visit the stable. Gemma did not pretend she would let him forget it. When they stopped beneath the bare rose arbor, he bent his head and kissed her with the same care he used when touching her maps, as if every line mattered. No one cheered. No council watched. No envoy approved. Only the winter roses, the distant horses, and the compass in Kalen's hand knew exactly where they stood. For once, so did he. And when they walked back toward the castle, Kalen turned the right way without prompting. Gemma squeezed his arm. He looked enormously pleased with himself. She let him have the victory for 3 whole breaths before pointing out that the path was straight. His laugh carried into the cold evening, low and warm, and the castle lights welcomed them home. In the weeks that followed, the new wall rose exactly where it belonged. Blue flags became foundation stones. Foundation stones became clean gray courses along the lawful ridge. Baron Velric sent a polite letter praising the clarity of the survey, which everyone agreed was the most romantic border document ever received. Kalen kept it in his office beside Gemma's route card with the red star. He claimed both were administrative records. Gemma claimed he was developing sentimental storage habits. The castle adjusted to them the way old buildings adjust to new doors. Slowly, noisily, and then as if the change had always been intended. The kitchen still sent pies. The laundry room still wagered buttons, though Gemma forced them to add a category for her own wrong turns because fairness mattered. Kaylin won that category exactly once, after Gemma walked into the wrong records closet while distracted by his smile. He never let her forget it. She never let him frame the tally. Thank you for listening. If this story grabbed your heart, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss our next story. We'll see you in the next one.